I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. I was an active member of our 4-H program, so I've been around Extension for a while growing up, and then went to NC State and actually got a bachelor's degree in animal science before I started working for the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division. And I started out working in a small slaughter processing facility, so as an inspector in the field. Got promoted to a complex processing facility that made all types of fresh sausages, smoked sausages, hot dogs, bologna, made sow, sea loaf, chitlins, chili, cured country hams, and sliced a lot of fat back. So I've been around quite a few processes when that comes to meat and poultry items. From there, I got into field training, so training new inspectors that came on with us. And then I became a full-time trainer, training supervisor, and now I'm in my current position of an agriculture program specialist. And this position, I oversee our training staff, a safety officer for our division. I'm responsible for our state sampling program, our Equal To program to the federal government. And I answered inquiries for people wanting to start new meat businesses and provide information to them on what's required to come under inspection. So we talked about a little bit at the beginning of August of what our jurisdiction is as far as the meat and poultry facilities, as far as if it's slaughter or further processing, or the registered meat handlers that we work with, our poultry exempt operators. And we also work in conjunction with the USDA's Food Safety Inspection Service. They're the ones that inspect all the poultry slaughter in the state of North Carolina. We have those cooperative agreements with them as well, so that we can inspect in some of the federal establishments for our TAA program and the cooperative agreement for our state program. So some of the laws that we operate under is the Federal Meat Inspection Act and our Poultry Products Inspection Act, and these are both federal laws. The Federal Meat Inspection Act covers all carcasses and parts of cattle, sheep, swine, goats, horses, mules, and other equines, and meat or meat products thereof, which may be brought into any slaughtering, meat canning, salting, packaging, rendering, or similar establishments. Our poultry products covers all the domestic birds when slaughtered and processed into products for human consumption. And those domestic birds are the chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, guineas, rat-tights, and squabs. And this is where we fall under as far as our Equal To program for our state program, and the same as for our TA establishments that bear a federal mark of inspection. In North Carolina, we have similar laws to the federal laws. So we fall under the North Carolina Compulsory Meat Inspection Law and the North Carolina Poultry Products Inspection Law. And the verbiage on the laws for the state laws versus the federal laws is pretty much the same. The only difference is that for our state law, the fallow deer, red deer, and these are law. And we also operate under the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. And this covers the slaughtering and handling of livestock that is carried out to be in humane methods, and prevents needless suffering of animals and results in safer and better working conditions for employees in the establishments. So those are some of the acts that we fall under. And we also have adopted the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 3, which is the food safety inspection part of the federal, the federal law. And we operate under federal directives and notices as well as state notices to carry out our jobs in the processing and slaughter facilities. Now, you guys probably have noticed when you've gone to the grocery store and purchased meat or poultry items, that there is some type of inspection on it. In order for products to be sold, for wholesale, or actually for any meat or poultry item to be the meat from that animal to be sold, it must bear a mark of inspection. So we have like the trapezoid for the state inspection. And if you have purchased products with that on it, it can only be sold in the state of North Carolina. And then there may be products you've purchased that have a federal grant of inspection, which can be sold within and without and outside of the state, as well as exported. So we have the U.S. Inspected and passed Department of Agriculture, which would be on your meat products, your red meats. And then there's inspected for wholesomeness by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that you will find on your poultry products that you purchase. So those are some of the types of inspection legends that you would see in the grocery store. We also have a custom grant of inspection, and this is where a farmer may decide to raise an animal and they take it to a facility to have it processed, to slaughter and processed, and then the product's returned to the owner for their own consumption, and that product would be stamped not for sale, and that's usually done under a custom grant of inspection. They can do that as well under with bearing a mark of inspection, or they can have it custom inspected. So let's talk about some of the requirements for receiving one of these grants of inspection. The facility requirements, regardless of the grant that you're applying for, are all the same. And these fall under our 9 CFR 416.2 through 5. And there's quite a bit to have in place prior to getting that grant of inspection to be able to produce product. We're going to look at the grounds about the establishment are maintained to prevent conditions that could lead to unsanitary conditions, adulteration of product, or interfere with inspection by program employees. Establishments must have in place a pest management program to prevent the harborage and breeding of pests on the grounds and within the establishment facilities. Pest control substances used must be safe and effective under the conditions of use and not be applied or stored in a manner that would result in the adulteration of product or the creation of insanitary conditions. When we talk about the construction, as far as the facility requirement, we're actually talking about the buildings and rooms. So the establishment's buildings, including their structures, rooms, and compartments, must be of sound construction and be kept in good repair and sufficient in size to allow for the processing and handling of and storage of the product in a manner that does not result in adulteration or creation of insanitary conditions. The walls, floors, and ceilings within the establishment must be built of durable materials that's impervious to moisture and be cleaned and sanitized as necessary to prevent the adulteration of product, and again, creating that insanitary conditions. The walls, floors, ceilings, doors, windows, and other outside openings must be constructed and maintained to prevent entrance of vermin such as flies, rats, and mouse. Rooms and compartment in which edible product is processed, handled, or stored must be separate and in distinct rooms or compartments in which inedible product is processed, handled, or stored. The facility must have adequate lighting of good quality and sufficient intensity to ensure that those sanitary conditions are maintained and that product is not adulterated. It must be provided in the areas where foods are processed, handled, stored, or examined, where equipment and utensils are cleaned, and in hand washing areas, dressing rooms, locker rooms, and the toilets. Establishments must be able to control ventilation. So they got to control the odors, vapors, and condensation to the extent necessary to prevent the adulteration of product and creation of insanitary conditions. We know with the hot and cold temperatures that are mixing within these establishments that condensation is really difficult to eliminate it, but they have to be able to control it. So have some type of plan in place. There's got to be plumbing systems installed and maintained to carry sufficient quantities of water that are required in locations throughout the establishment. It's got to be able to properly convey sewage and liquid disposable waste from the establishments. prevent the adulteration of product, water supplies, equipment, and utensils, and prevent the creation of insanitary conditions throughout the establishment. There's got to be adequate floor drainage in all areas where floors are subject to flood type cleaning, where normal operations release and discharge water or other liquid waste on the floor, such as in a slaughter floor where you're washing down carcasses, you're going to be flooding the floor with water. So you got to be able to adequately remove that water. You got to be able to prevent backflow conditions in cross connections between piping systems that discharge wastewater and sewage. The piping systems that they carry the water from the product manufacturing, and prevent the backup of sewer gases. That's again controlling those odors. You got to have proper sewage disposal. Sewage must be disposed into a sewage system separate from all other drainage lines and disposed of through other means sufficient to prevent backup of sewage into areas where product is processed, handled, and stored. And when the sewage disposal system is provided in a private system, they're required to have state or local health authority. The establishment must furnish that approval letter to the inspection personnel upon request. And this is where a facility may have a septic tank. So you're going to need the permit that you've received to have that septic tank. It's got to be an adequate water supply. It's got to be a potable water supply from the local or state health agency or jurisdiction. It could be well water, or it could be from city or county water. If it's a well water being used, you have to show the potability of the water twice a year. So you'll have to have it sampled. As far as the city or the county water goes, you've got to show that it is a potable water source, getting a letter from the county. And once you have that on file, then we're good. But with the well water, it does have to be sampled twice a year. You have to provide dressing rooms, lavatories, and toilets. They must be sufficient in number and ample in size. We don't regulate the number of bathrooms and such. That's regulated by OSHA regulations. But they must be conveniently located and maintained in sanitary condition and in good repair at all times. And they must have running hot, cold water, hand soap, and towels provided with these facilities. You'll have probably sinks in your restrooms. You'll have sinks within your processing areas or your slaughter floors. Anywhere that you may see the need for someone that could possibly have contaminated their hands or whatnot to be able to clean those. And again, these facility requirements are for all types of inspection grants that they're applying for. A lot of people, when I talk to them, they'll say, well, I've got this place, or I'm looking to rent this place or buy this place, but they're not sure if it's going to meet the requirements. And they want to know what needs to be done so they can determine if it's worth their investment or if they need to look for somewhere else. So we can provide a courtesy review. Just call our office and we can arrange for someone local to your area to come out and look at the facility to ensure that it's meeting the requirements. And that way the person starting the business knows which direction to go with as far as how much they may have to spend to get the facility up to the regulatory requirements before they can be given a grant of inspection, or if they need to look for somewhere else. So some other requirements are a sanitation standard operating procedure. These requirements are for the state and federal grant of inspections that could be given. You have to have this developed before we can even give you a grant of inspection. And these fall under our 416.11 through 16 regulations. And the establishment is responsible for developing, implementing, and maintaining a written SSOP. And that SSOP clearly defines the establishment's responsibility to consistently follow effective sanitation procedures that will substantially minimize the risk of product contamination and adulteration. it's a regulatory requirement that the plant create that written SSOP describing daily procedures conducted before and during operations to prevent direct contamination and adulteration of products. So these procedures would identify pre-operational and operational sanitation procedures as far as if they're going to inspect their equipment, or how often they may be cleaning the equipment, or you could incorporate the condensation program as far as monitoring condensation within this SSOP. At a minimum, this SSOP must address the cleaning of food contact surfaces and facilities, equipment, and utensils. So it can break down how you're actually going to clean the equipment. So removing any type of gross material that could be on there, any meat particles or fat residue that could be left over, applying a potable water rinse, applying a soap, another potable water rinse, inspecting it to make sure that it's clean before you apply a sanitizer to it. So at a minimum, it has to list those. It also must contain the frequency that the procedures in the SSOP are conducted, and identify employees or position responsible for implementing or maintaining the SSOP. These SSOPs, they can be as, I guess, as thin as an establishment wants to write them, or they can include as much detail as the person wants to put in there. But inspection personnel is going to verify that whatever is written in that SSOP, that the establishment is following those procedures. Another requirement before establishments given a grant of inspection is they have to develop a HACCP system for each of the products that they produce in the facility. And this is under our 417.1 through 7 regulations. Whoever develops this HACCP system is required by the regulations to be trained in the 7 principles of HACCP. So they could get the training themselves. NC State actually offers a nice online training that you can get the training yourself to be trained to write this HACCP system, or you can hire a consultant to write the system. So this HACCP, it provides a framework for establishments to conduct a science-based process controls that can be validated as effective in eliminating, preventing, or reducing to an acceptable level the food safety hazards that are reasonably likely to occur in an official establishment for a particular process. Under this HACCP system, establishments assume full responsibility of producing products that are safe for the consumers. And the ways to go about developing this HACCP system is just simply following these 7 principles. So if you conduct that hazard analysis, so basically you're identifying each step in the process of producing that product, from, let's say, receiving the live animals, or receiving the meat product, receiving packaging materials, receiving the non-meat ingredients. So those are the spices and seasonings that are being added to these products, to the storage of those items, formulation, I don't know, grinding, stuffing, cooking, cooling of the products, packaging of it. So you're going to identify any biological, chemical, or physical hazards that could occur in those processes, and determine ways to prevent those hazards from occurring. So you could deem those hazards to be reasonably likely to occur or not reasonably likely to occur. If they're not reasonably likely to occur, you're going to have some type of support, a letter of guarantee maybe that says it's safe, or some type of scientific support that says it's most likely not going to occur. And this is the reason why I have a prerequisite program that we're not going to have any pathogen outgrowth in the cooler storage, because our cooler is maintained at 35 degrees. So maybe they're monitoring that cooler on a daily basis to ensure it's maintaining that temperature. But if you determine that that hazard is reasonably likely to occur, so let's say in cooking of roast beef, you may determine that E. coli, 0157, or those STECs may be an issue, or salmonella an issue. And so then you're going to determine a critical control point there, because that hazard is reasonably likely to occur. And that critical control point, or a CCP as we refer to it, is defined as a point, a step, or procedure in the food process at which control can be applied. And as a result, the food safety hazard can be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to an acceptable level. So if you're cooking that product, you may want to cook it to, say, 158 degrees, because that would eliminate salmonella, which is what we use for our indicator organism, to that it kills it at that temperature. So you may want to have that critical control point there. And once, so you've got that critical control point, and that 158 degrees is going to be your established critical limit to eliminate that pathogen that you've identified as reasonably likely to occur. The critical limits are the parameters to indicate whether the control measure at the CCP is in or out of control. Those critical limits are most often based on a process parameter such as temperature, time, physical dimensions, or the presence of target pathogens. And those critical limits must be actual values that can be measured or quantifiable. So you have to be able to measure something. It's not a yes or no limit there. So it has to be something measurable or quantifiable. Once you've established that critical limit, then you're going to have to put in place monitoring procedures to ensure that you're meeting that critical limit. So once those critical limits are set, for each CCP, the HACCP plan develops procedures must be established to monitor the CCPs to determine whether critical limits are being met. That monitoring is a planned sequence of observations or measurements to assess whether the CCP is under control and to produce an accurate record for future use and verification. Those procedures should be designed and determined when deviations from a critical limit occur so that appropriate corrective actions can be initiated. So then you have to develop those corrective actions. And those are actions to be taken where that critical limit's not met. And those actions depend upon the process used and the type of food that's produced. So if you're cooking a product and you say you're going to measure the temperature of the cooked product after 30 minutes, and most of the time after 30 minutes, you've met that critical limit. Well, if you're not meeting it at that 30 minutes, you may say, well, you're going to cook it for 5 more minutes and then remeasure it to ensure that it's met that limit. So that could be part of your corrective actions there. So when there is a deviation from the critical limit, the corrective actions are required to prevent potentially hazardous foods from reaching the consumers. And they must consist of identifying and eliminating the cause of the deviation, ensuring that the CCP is under control after the corrective action is taken, ensuring the measures are established to prevent reoccurrence, and ensure that no product affected by the deviation is shipped. So all that product should still be maintained in the control of that establishment. And at this point for the corrective actions, because you're not sure of what caused that deviation, that an establishment will just put that they're going to meet the corrective actions regulation when it comes to meeting their corrective actions, which is acceptable, instead of putting something specific into their, because you're not knowing what actually caused that deviation. So we've talked about those critical limits and the monitoring procedures and corrective actions. You've got to have some type of record keeping system and documentation in order to be able to support your system. So they're going to have to develop an effective record keeping system. And the records are that written evidence documenting the operation of the HACCP system. All those measures taken at the CCP, corrective actions, should be documented and kept on file. These records become very important to an establishment because they can be used to trace the production history of a finished product. And if any question arises about the product, a review of the records may be the only way to determine that the product was produced in a safe manner and produced in accordance with the HACCP plan that they have written. So these become very important in supporting that you have a safe product that you are supplying to the consumers. The supporting documentation also includes a rationale used to establish those critical limits, the CCPs, the monitoring procedures, and the frequencies, the corrective actions and verification procedures. So you're having to scientifically support your system and how it works. It also includes all that scientific references, the regulatory resources, and materials from other resources that may have been used and developed the HACCP plan. You could have information that you receive from the Extension Service, from academic experts, from consultants, from industry trade associations, from peer-reviewed journals. And you're also going to have daily operational records that were accumulated, which we usually think of those as those HACCP records. And these include those actual records from the implementation of the HACCP plan. So when you actually measured a temperature or and whatnot. So lastly, for the HACCP system, it has to be, you have to have verification procedures. And the HACCP system must be systematically verified. And that pretty much means that the verification establishes the accuracy of and confirms the monitoring of the critical control points. The verification procedures demonstrate that the HACCP system is adequately controlling those food safety hazards. And after that initial validation, the system must be verified periodically. So the regulations say once you're given a grant of inspection, so you'll be given a conditional grant of inspection, you have 90 days to validate your HACCP system. So you're going to have that 90 days to test out to ensure that it works as it's intended. And then after you've shown that it's a validated system and works, you're given a permanent grant of inspection, but you may have to periodically do ongoing verification to ensure that that system is continuing to work as intended. The verification activities that we like to see or that are required to be written in your HACCP system are the calibration procedures for process monitoring instruments, which could be a thermometer, a water activity meter, a pH meter, any other type of instrument you're using to take measurements with. So it has to be calibrated for accuracy. Excuse me, direct observation of monitoring and corrective actions, and a records review of the records created for the products that are produced. So that's usually the big hurdle that establishments have to jump in order to become an inspected establishment. Another key point for establishments that are slaughtering animals is humane handling. And those regulations are 313.1 through 50. And it's very important for slaughter, because if there's any egregious violation of the regulations for humane handling, an establishment would be or could be suspended until they have a plan in place to ensure that they're able to handle the animals humanely. And this to prevent needless suffering and results in safer and better working conditions within the slaughter industry and improves products and slaughtering operations and produces other benefits for producers, processors, and consumers. So as inspection personnel, we're going to look that there are measures in place for inclement weather, that there's acceptable truck unloading so the animals do not become harmed or hurt, that there's water and feed available to the animals at the times specified. So water has to always be available. Feed has to be available if they're going to be on the premises for the 24 hours. Handling during animal inspection, the handling of the suspect or disabled animals, the electric prod or alternative object use. We're going to look for any slips, trips, or falls. We're going to verify the stunning effectiveness of the animals and check for consciousness on the rail. Excuse me. And the humane handling actually falls for the state, federal, and the custom exempt facilities, that there's no harm caused to the animals. Next is our poultry exemptions. These are exemptions from the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Poultry Products Inspection Act. And these are meant for our small farmers. Our poultry exemptions cover the chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, guineas, ratites, and squabs. And we have 2 exemptions in the state, and these are our 1,000 bird or 20,000 birds per year that can be slaughtered and processed without a daily inspection, whereas everything that's for under a state or a federal grant of inspection, it's a daily inspection anytime the product's produced. These are not. This is from poultry of one's own raising on their farm. So it's an actual own farm raising and slaughter of the animals. Once you decide that you're going to be under an exemption, whether it's 1,000 birds or 20,000 birds, you're under that exemption for the year. You can't say, well, let's just start with 1,000 and you've met that limit and you want to switch to 20,000. You're going to have to wait until the next year to switch to that 20,000 bird exemption. And these are subject to review by our compliance on a semi-annual basis, or more often as needed based on reviews from our officers. People under these exemptions must operate under the sanitary conditions of 416.2 through 5. So those are our facility requirements. We have certain label requirements for these poultry exempt operators. And we have our MPID notices 5-18 and 6-18, the 518 for the 1,000 birds and the 618 for 20,000 birds. And this says that the label has to have the processor's name, their address, and they have to have a statement it says exempt PL 90-492. And this also requires them to have safe handling instructions on the product. And the poultry products that are produced under these exemptions can only be sold within the state of North Carolina. So they cannot be sold outside of the state or shipped outside of the state. Another category we have are registered meat and poultry handlers. And these are people that deal in meat or poultry products in or for commerce and do not operate under a state or federal inspection. So maybe they're a farmer that wants to raise their own animals, but they have so much other things going on their farm that they don't have time to slaughter and process it under inspection to be able to sell it. So they take these animals to an inspected facility, have them slaughtered and processed under inspection and packaged. So they're going to bear that mark of inspection. And then they bring that product back to the farm to be able to sell it. So for these, we're going to look that they have certain things in place to ensure that they have proper storage for safe products. So the facilities must be constructed and maintained in such a manner sufficient to prevent direct contamination or adulteration of products during handling or storage. The facilities must be maintained in a manner sufficient to prevent the creation of unsanitary conditions or to ensure that product is not contaminated or adulterated. So good housekeeping practices are key. Scheduled routine cleaning is recommended of these facilities. They've got to be able to prevent rodent and pests. So there's got to be control measures in place, implemented and maintained. So they may be transporting this product to a grocery store that's going to sell it for them, or a restaurant, or they may be transporting it to a farmer's market to sell. So these vehicles, refrigerators, or chest type freezers used for transport of fresh or frozen meat or poultry products must be in good working conditions, designed to prevent unsanitary conditions and capable of maintaining all products in a safe and wholesome condition. The products must be handled and stored under acceptable conditions, as far as proper temperature control, proper rotation and handling, which will prevent unsanitary conditions and misbranding and adulteration of products. And there will be a periodic review of these facilities by our program personnel to ensure that product is maintained in a sanitary manner, that it's properly labeled, and so that it's deemed unadulterated. So now I just gave you guys a lot of information to think about. You can contact us, call our main office here, ask to speak to me. I am the one that answers the questions 95% of the time. You can go to our website. We do have more information on our website. You can go to USDA's Food Safety Inspection Services website. We work, like I said, in conjunction with them a lot. So we do utilize their resources as well. And we'll have some time here in a little bit for some questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to you now, Lynette.
Thank you, Lisa. Excellent information. And just to sort of support what Lisa mentioned, if I can find it, we do have an extension program. Let's see. There we go. Hopefully you can all see my screen. In regards to the support that Lisa mentioned, you know, if you are a processor or someone, you know, working in extension, working with other meat processors, we do have within the Department of Food and Bioprocessing and Nutrition Sciences, there is a meat science extension program, which is led by Dr. Dana Hansen. As you can see, his contact information here is listed. Dr. Hansen's research and extension work has been within the meat processing facility. He's worked with anyone from, you know, being a chef to those who, you know, have their own small facility processing animals, or even the larger companies such as Smithfield Foods. So he covers the gamut in regards to meat processing science. And his extension and outreach program has included industry training. He's also included a barbecue camp, which is well attended, and the charcuterie school, to name a few. So if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Dana Hansen. As Lisa mentioned, you know, for example, HACCP plan for validation and verification, you may need that expert to find more information, and Dr. Hansen is certainly a good reference to refer to there. So just to sum up here, you know, thank you for your attendance today. As a reminder, next week we will be focusing on the NCDHHS Food Protection and Facilities branch. It is that branch that has jurisdiction over foods sold for direct consumption. So think about restaurants and caterers, retail establishments. All right, so with that, thank you for your attendance. And I will now stop the recording.